Okay, hi you beautiful New Zealanders. Well, as you know, we're in the series called The Treaty for Newbies. These are for people who don't know much about the treaty and they want to know about the treaty and they're interested in the treaty and they want to be confident when they have conversations about the treaty. So this is just for you. So we're into Article 2, Video 3. This is the third in the series on Article 2. The Treaty of Waitangi, Article 2, Sentence 1 says this: the Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and the tribes and to all the people of New Zealand the possession of their lands, dwellings and all their property. Pretty simple, isn't it? In my previous two videos on Article 2, we discovered that in the first sentence of this article, the British confirmed that Maori owned all the land in New Zealand apart from what they had sold to settlers and land speculators before the treaty was signed. The British referred to Maori as, quote, the people of New Zealand, so there's no problem with that. We also discovered that the final English draft of the treaty, also known as the Littlewood Draft, and the treaty in Maori are almost a perfect match. That is to say, if you want to know what the treaty in Maori says, just read the final English draft. So there it is, there's the Littlewood Draft, and there's the treaty in Maori, and the two are almost identical. Now, if you want to know where the differences are, just go back and watch videos 1 and 2 about Article 2. Alright, the Littlewood English Draft is crucially important for the whole treaty debate because it tells us what the British intended the treaty to mean and what it did mean. It stops us being hoodwinked by Maori activists, so I hope you download the Littlewood Draft, read it and hang on to it because it's valuable. I can't emphasize this point enough. We discovered too that activists use what's known as the rogue James Freeman version of the treaty as the treaty in English. This rogue James Freeman version is very different from the treaty in Maori. Activists use this because it allows them to make the treaty say what they want it to say, not what it does say. See, it's a trick. So here's the rogue James Freeman version, here's the treaty in Maori, and boom, they are very different. Well, why are they doing this? This has opened the door for activists to tell us that Henry Williams in 1840, he was the guy who translated the final English draft into Maori, did a very bad job on the translation. This is what they say. This then leads on to them telling us that we need them to do a back translation for us, which leads to them being able to make the treaty say what they want it to say. You see how it works? It's been a cunning plan that they've been running with for nearly 50 years. Cunning as a fox, in fact. So here again is Article 2 of the Treaty, Sentence 1. The Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and the tribes and to all the people of New Zealand the possession of their lands, dwellings and all their property. It's pretty simple. You know, what this is saying is that the British guaranteed Maori the possession or the ownership of their land, dwellings and property. We could swap out the word possession for ownership. When we do this, what the British intention was becomes even more clear. So, here is a crucial consideration. If the British were going to protect the Maori ownership or possession of Maori land, they, i.e. the British, needed to define the boundaries of the land which each tribe owned. This just makes sense, totally logical. The British could not protect what was undefined. So top of mind for the British was surveying the land that each tribe claimed they owned. And you can imagine the fights between chiefs about that. The best way to explain it is like this. Imagine a map of New Zealand. In the middle of the North Island, draw a red square 1 centimetre by 1 centimetre. There it is. Let's say this square represents the land owned by a particular tribe as at the 6th of February 1840 after the land was surveyed. The British considered that everything on that piece of land inside that 1 centimetre square, including the land itself, the dwellings, the chattels, the rivers, the mountains, the forest, everything, was literally owned by that tribe. The British promised to protect that tribe's ownership of everything inside, that's the key word, that 1 centimetre square. This is all that Article 2, Sentence 1 promised. It's very, very simple. The activists have made it very complicated, but it's not. It's very simple. Today we'd call it just house and chattels. Historian Dr. Matthew Wright confirms that Maori were only guaranteed British protection for what was inside their 1 centimetre square. Those, i.e. the areas surveyed by the British as being owned by a chief, were explicitly only the areas on which Maori actually lived and which they used, unquote. In other words, everything inside their 1 centimetre square. Now we know that roughly 540 chiefs signed the treaty, so in effect we could say there were 540 1 centimetre squares all over New Zealand, each square representing the land owned by each tribe. That makes sense, doesn't it? Not all the squares were 1 centimetre square. Some were smaller, some larger, depending on the size of the tribe and the size of the land they own. That makes sense too. What about a land with a coastal boundary? That's interesting because now we're onto the seabed and the foreshore and the coastline, which is a very current topic. Many of the 1 centimetre squares had a coastal boundary. You'd expect this as New Zealand is made up of islands, so we've got water all around us. Eminent New Zealand historian and former professor of history at Otago University, G.S. Parsonson, contends that Maori in the early contact period had their own fishing spots. he writes, in the early contact period, the hapu were still hunter-gatherers. Now, early contact, he means early 1800s. That is, they lived on birds, rats, shellfish, and fish, and fern root. What they laid claim to or they owned was birds, trees, rat runs and rat roads, pa tuna, or eel weirs, and specific fern root patches. The saltwater hapu, that's those with a coastal boundary, similarly claims specific shellfish beds and specific shellfish spots where they knew they could catch snapper. There's the reference to that. So what I want us to notice is that Maori tribes had coastal fishing spots which they marked out with sticks. These sticks designating tribal boundaries for fishing. There is never any mention of tribal fishing areas extending miles out to sea. Why would there be? The sea was teeming with fish in 1840. Maori could catch an abundance of fish off the beach or on the rocks. Now this is where it gets interesting. The rogue James Freeman version, which I've told you about, of the treaty mentions fisheries, whereas both the authentic final English draft of the treaty, the Littlewood Draft, and the treaty in Maori do not. Activists hold up the rogue James Freeman version of the treaty and cry, see, the treaty promises us all the fisheries of New Zealand. Well, answer, the treaty does not promise Maori the fisheries. This is precisely why the James Freeman version is rogue. Not only this, but the activists claim to the foreshore and seabed which we see today, and now all the beaches which we see today, these are also not in the treaty. Neither in the treaty in Maori nor the final English draft. So who owns the seabed and the foreshore? Well, enter Dr. Hugh Barr. Hugh Barr writes that all New Zealanders own the foreshore and seabed, the water and the air in a Western society, was a principle first written down as far as records exist by the Roman Emperor Justinian the Great about 530 AD. He is famous for compiling and rewriting Roman law, which is still the basis of civil law in many modern states. His law of public commons states in English, quote, by natural law itself, these things are the common property of all: air, running water, the sea, and with it all the shores of the sea. Brilliant quote. This law was imported by Britain into New Zealand in 1840 and was implicit in the treaty. And there's the reference. Now, back to Article 2, Sentence 1. All the British intended in the first sentence of Article 2 was to guarantee Maori the ownership of their 1 centimetre square area of land and anything on that land, plus their houses, plus chattels like wakas, implements and tools. If their 1 centimetre square happened to have a coastal boundary, it was implicit in the treaty that Maori would continue to be able to fish as they had always done, and the British would protect them in that right because of the law of public commons. See? Remember, Maori became British citizens in Article 3, so their gathering seafood and fishing were protected by the law of public commons. They were not given any special customary rights in the treaty. There's no evidence to this whatsoever. As British citizens, they had the same right as all other British citizens to access and use the seabed, foreshore and beaches. That is just how it was. Therefore, their demand today to be given special customary rights to seabed, the foreshore and the coastline, well, what is it? It's just a scam. Come on. Just remember the law of public commons and Justinian. Now this is where it gets really interesting, and here's a really good thought. Why is there no record anywhere in any book on New Zealand history recording how Maori sold part of the seabed, the foreshore, or the coastline to settlers, or to anyone for that matter? Why is this? Doesn't that seem odd? Lots of records of them selling land, but nothing of the seabed, the foreshore and the beaches. Well, the answer's obvious. They never owned the foreshore and seabed and the coastline in the first place. Land, yes, lots of evidence that they sold lots of it, but the seabed, foreshore and coastline? No, never. No evidence whatsoever. That's because of the law of commons. As I said, the idea that Maori had special customary rights to the seabed, foreshore and seabed has no basis in the treaty. So what are politicians doing playing around with that? It should be off the table, gone. And all the foreshore and seabed returned to all New Zealanders. That's a fact. Maori never owned any of it and never had any special customary rights to any of it. As I have said in previous videos, records show that Maori in the decades following 1840 went on to sell 92% of their land. Now I'll put the proof of that in the description of this video. The 8% left, that which is owned by Maori today, is the only land they have full control over, just like any other landowner. So what are we to make of the cry of the activists who say we want the whole country back? What is this? I'll tell you what it is. It's seller's remorse, that is all. They just regret selling all their land. Well, you know what? They can't have it back because they've sold it. Sorry about that, mate. It's seller's remorse. Okay, let's wrap this up. The 6 points I want you to remember, please. Don't you love the lady with looking through the top of her glasses like a school teacher? What I want you to remember from today is the British surveyed the land each chief owned. They're 1 centimetre squares. If a chief's land had a coastal element, Maori could still fish those waters and gather their seafood. Each tribe had carefully marked out fishing spots that were no-go areas for other tribes. However, Maori did not own the beach or coastline on the border of their land. According to the British law of the Law of Commons, the beaches belonged to all the citizens of the country. And since Maori had ceded sovereignty in Article 1 and become British citizens in Article 2, this law applied to them as well. See, you know what? The treaty is so simple, and it's so simple to understand, and it's not complicated. I just want to say thank you to all those people who are doing things for us and with us and supporting us. New subscribers, welcome aboard. I hope you get a lot out of these videos and that you share them with all your mates. Those who like the post, that really helps our videos. Those who post comments, those are huge when you make a comment. Those who share these videos, that's also massively helpful to us. And those who support us financially, you know, we're so grateful to you, because then we can keep putting these videos out, keep the cards going out and turn the country around. Those who are giving out cards, you guys are just awesome doing all that. You are awesome. All right, thanks you guys for listening. I hope you take that on board. You remember the 6 points, and you have a great day or a great night or whatever time you're watching this. All right, see you next time. Oh, and you know what? I nearly forgot. Don't forget. Please don't forget to make a submission to stop Kiwis losing the beaches to Maori. You know, good job. This video is all about that. So you can make a submission by going to this website, www.saveourshores.nz, and put your submission in there, because we need thousands of people saying, no, we're not going to allow that. We don't want that. It's not in the treaty. And what the heck are you doing? And so please do that. All right. See you next time. Thanks. Bye.